Hey everyone, welcome back to Geet Builds. I am Geet, creator and founder of both Minecraft and This Is No Mine, It's a Tomb. So today I'm going to be doing a time lapse of making the Dwarven city you see here, which ended up being about 60-ish hours of building, so definitely my biggest project so far. So the map starts out looking like this, a nice valley surrounded by mountains. And to get this, I opened up WorldPainter and made the terrain using that program. I'm going to talk a bit about the map as I'm making it, but if you're not interested in WorldPainter stuff, then you can go ahead and skip to 240, and that's when the in-game building starts. So when I started making this, I kinda had an idea of what I wanted the area to look like going in, but wasn't totally sure on all the details. I knew I wanted it to be a corridor of mountains with the Dwarven city going at the very end, and you can see here I made a horseshoe-shaped mountain range. But I recently got some new mountain brushes and experimented with those a bit here and tried to find one that I thought would work best for the main mountain, but just really couldn't get a good feel for any of them, and ended up using some of the old mountain brushes I'm more familiar with. So after getting the shape of the main mountain, I went around and made the ridgelines of the rest of the island, and ended up going around the back of the main mountain with a second row of mountain so that I could add even more space for caverns and caves. And I knew I wanted there to be a huge gate leading into the mountain, but I thought I wanted most of the building to actually be inside of the mountain, and then have maybe a little building and mostly walls outside. But as I was working in WorldPainter, I decided that I really liked how the lake creates a sort of natural moat, and that it'd be more interesting to have an outer city in front of the cave. I also struggled trying to decide what color the mountains should be. I knew the city was going to be a lot of gray stone, so I thought about having the mountains be brown to contrast it. But I didn't think it would make sense if the mountains were made of brown stone but the city was made of gray stone, and I liked the mountains from the castle video from a few months ago, so I ended up going with the gray color with white streaks like that map. I experimented with having the mountains at the end being heavily covered in snow, and then having it blend to no snow as you go down, but it seemed to distract more than it added to the map. So I just went with a little bit of snow at the peaks that are hardly noticeable, but I left it just to have it. So in all my time using WorldPainter, I've never really done a whole lot making caves. I've used cave layers to make some inverted cliffs where the top hangs over the bottom, and sometimes I've made natural arches with cave layers, but for the most part I don't like building underground because it's hard to get the lighting right, and it can be hard to get everything to look right on video too. But I've really been wanting to make a Dwarven city, so I spent some time experimenting to get the cave layer settings tweaked to what I wanted, and added a big network of caves and caverns going underneath the mountains. And it might be hard to see in the sped up time lapse, but there's a few dots in the caves where I got rid of the cave layer, so that area will be a stone column when the map is exported from WorldPainter to Minecraft. And now I'm finally going through and finishing up the map with rocks, plants, and trees. In the lower areas I used mostly oak trees, and then on the higher parts of the map I added pine trees, and then have a mix of stumps, logs, boulders, and other forest floor stuff wherever there are trees. It's not always totally noticeable from far away, but in game I think it helps with immersion to have all those natural objects. So this is where I'm going to start building the city. I started with walls since I think it's easier to keep track in my head where everything is going to go if I define the area where I'll be building first, and then start actually building after that. And as I usually do, I go with orange wool first to get the outline and shape of the walls first, and then go back after and replace the orange with a pattern. For all the buildings in the outer city, the walls are mainly made of regular and cracked stone bricks and polished andesite. I also thought it'd be kinda cool if the walls were interrupted by big boulders, as if the walls were built around them to make them more defensible and mesh with the land. So I made the shape with sand and then turned the sand into a pattern of mountain rock. With the outline of the walls done, I started working on the gate leading into the city. So back when I was a kid, I played this game you might have heard of called Battle for Middle-earth, which is a Lord of the Rings game, and had these cool looking dwarven towers and buildings. So a lot of the style I create for this city is heavily inspired by that game. And I've also been playing a lot of Warhammer 2 recently, and I use some of the game's architecture as inspiration as well. But in both, there's a lot of geometric shapes and hard lines for Dwarven architecture, and it translates really well into Minecraft. But the towers on the outer walls are almost exact replicas of the ones from Battle for Middle-earth, just with some color changes to match what I wanted my city to look like. And after I made the first tower, I copied it, pasted it over to the right, and then blended it with the terrain. After that, I went around the walls and did the same thing 3 more times to break up the long stretches of empty wall. With the towers placed, I got to work finishing the city walls and giving them details. I went with another geometric pattern that left a repeating diamond shape, since it would look good on the flat sections and could be rotated to the diagonal sections as well. And there'd be 2 different diagonal degrees to work with, so I knew that whatever design I made, it had to be easily rotated to fit those angles. So after making the wall pattern, I copied it and pasted it along the walls to save time and make sure that I didn't make any mistakes trying to do it all myself. After getting all the outsides done, I filled in the top with nether slabs to give it a color that would stand out but not be too obnoxious. The color scheme I decided to go with for the city was that most of the walls would be the stone brick pattern, and the roofs and walkways would be regular nether bricks. A lot of the buildings have recess and depth built into them, like the walls do, and whenever that was the case, I made the furthest back sections of these with black stone. There's also a lot of ornamentation on all the towers, buildings, and gates, and that is usually red nether bricks. It's a bit brighter than all the other colors, so it stands out a lot more from the more muted natural colors, which makes it really good as a decorative material. You can see an example of all of this in the tower ahead, black stone for depth, stone on the outside, and red nether bricks for ornamentation on the top. I also just rotated the wall pattern 45 degrees using World Edit, and then fixed some of the things that didn't look quite right, and then pasted that along the walls over here and built down to the ground so that everything looks right. World Edit made it way easier than trying to rotate it 45 degrees myself. And with that section finished, the walls are basically done except for the outer gate itself, which I saved for a bit later. The first building I started working on inside the walls was a raised platform that would have a gatehouse leading into the mountain. I make a couple more doors leading into the mountain, which are going to eventually connect to the city inside the mountain when I start building that. For this platform, I knew that there'd be a pretty good view of it from the front, so I decided to use that front flat section to make a Dwarven glyph design. I scrolled through Google Images for a bit, experimenting with different glyph patterns I found, and finally came across a good concept art that looked good when made in Minecraft. And that style ends up being something I play off of for a bunch of other wall and floor designs throughout the city. I made 2 more tower designs, similar to the ones on the outer gate but a bit smaller, and then created the gatehouse on top. The gate is a layered triangle pattern at the top, which matches the triangle pattern on the towers to both sides, which I thought gave the platform and the gatehouse a cool symmetrical look that ties it together. I kept with the theme of a blackstone line around the top of all the buildings too, and ended up doing that on everything throughout the city. It's a cool unifying decoration, but it also helps to mark where there are other buildings, especially once I start building directly into the stone and the mountain and building start blending together. Then I made a floor design that's similar to the glyph pattern on the front of the platform, and then pushed that down into the ground using World Edit. To finish this section up, I threw together a geometric wall design, then copy and paste it to the other side of the gatehouse, and then fill the ceiling with nether brick slabs. And it's kind of hard to see the wall pattern on the gatehouse since it's tucked into the mountain, but I liked it a lot, and I ended up recycling it as a wall design for a Citadel I make in a bit later, but I'll probably use it again when I start building inside the mountain as well. That's something I've done a lot of in the past, converting a design into a makeshift schematic and then using it on other parts of a project. It just saves a ton of time and mental effort in making a new design every time I start a new building. And it helps the project seem like it's made with a unifying theme. So it's partially laziness, but I think it's an example of work smarter not harder. And sticking with that theme, I copy the entire platform, mirror it to the right, and then get rid of all the mountain and grass blocks so that it will fit as it should into the mountain. And then go ahead and paste it onto the other side of where the main entrance will be to the underground city. I usually don't like copy pasting entire buildings, since it can make a build feel a bit too symmetrical, but the platform over on the right ends up being mostly obstructed by the Citadel, and it's a hardly noticeable part of the project. So it just made sense to just reuse the platform and not waste time on building that won't be seen too much anyways. So I just built the outer gate, which isn't too fancy and has just a moderate amount of detailing, which I think fits with the rest of the wall design. I added 2 patios in front of the towers and then have a walkway leading down between them. And I know I'm eventually going to get a couple comments about whether this city is defensible or not, but I decided not to give this entrance a door or a gate just purely for aesthetic reasons. I wanted to be able to see through the gate easily for a cinematic view, and I didn't want anything to get in the way of it. Because at the end of the day, I think it's more important for the project to look good than it is for it to be able to hold off a theory-crafted invasion. So with the entrance done, I moved back into the city and start working on the Citadel, which is the last building that I took inspiration from Battle for Middle-earth for. And this one is modeled after the Dwarven fortress if you want to look it up and compare how mine ends up looking, or if you just want to see how I take an existing thing as inspiration and then recreate it in Minecraft. The towers are again similar to the outer ones, with the middle part of the tower being chipped away at the corners to have depth, and then expanding back out to the top. I tried a couple different decoration designs at the top, but just didn't think I had enough room to make a glyph design I liked, so went with a geometric design instead. The Citadel towers end up being a bit heavier looking than the outside towers, and it makes for a good strong corner to the Citadel. Again, you can see I'm sticking with the color scheme of stone brick outsides, black stone depth, red nether brick decorations, and regular nether brick roofs. I thought about changing the color scheme on a couple buildings to add gold or other colors, but thought I looked too busy or clashed with the colors I had, so I ended up not doing that. I copy-paste the design to the 4 corners to make a square, and then create the walls connecting them. The front extends outwards and then meets for a flat gate. I would have done a similar design at the back, but the building ends up being really close to the city walls and wouldn't have fit right, so I make it flat instead. And this is where I reused the wall design from the platform I just built, and you can get a much better view of it on this. So I'm going to take a second to talk about the channel real quick. If you've been watching me for a while, you're probably used to the subscriber giveaways that I do every week, and I'm going to continue to do those, so feel free to comment below if you haven't entered yet but want to do so. Just let me know how I can get in touch with you if you win, and I can go ahead and enter you. So yeah, I'm still going to do the giveaways, but I think last year I got a bit burned out on not creating some of my own passion projects and only making other people's ideas, so I'm going to try to balance that this year. I'll keep giving back to you all as a thank you for supporting me and providing me with such a great community to share my builds, while also taking the time every once in a while to make some of my own projects that I've thought of. So for the next couple of videos, I'm going to finish up this map. It made sense to split the videos up between the part of the city that's under the sky and the part of the video that's under the mountains. So I'll have another video probably in 2 to 3 weeks where I complete this project. I would like to have it up next Friday, but I've got a couple big commissions I need to finish up first. But after that, I'll get back into the subscriber giveaways and posting regularly on Fridays again. So if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for joining the Geetles, and I'll be back to posting more regularly now that the holidays are over. So to get back to the building, I finished up the Citadel, made a platform for it to sit on, and then copy-pasted it back into the city. Using sand, I've been making what eventually will be rocks and boulders to help blend it with the ground and so it's not so abruptly copy-pasted in. And in the past, to get my builds to blend with nature, I've usually used grass and trees to make everything flow together. But I wanted the city to feel like a conquering of nature and stone, instead of the city being blended with nature. So I don't really use a lot of trees or plants, and instead make rocks that the buildings seem to be sculpted out of, or cliff overhangs that hover over gates and walkways. Inside the walls of the Citadel, I've been making an octagon shape with 2 tiers as the centerpiece of the courtyard. I want it to feel like a special part of the city that stands out from everything around it, so I tweak the color scheme a bit and add polished diorite on the outside for supports, which extend all the way up past the top of the roof, and the roof itself ends up being red nether bricks instead of the regular kind, so it's a little brighter and stands out compared to what the regular version would have looked like. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to make this building, but I'm leaning toward it being maybe the tomb of a dwarf who founded the city, or some other important historical figure, and having it look like Balin's tomb from Moria. After completing whatever this is going to eventually be, I raised it a bit and built a platform for it to sit on, with a ramp sloping up with slabs. Then I made another floor pattern and pushed that down into the ground too. I like doing big patterns like these, since they look good from afar, but also still make a space feel detailed when you're in-game on top of them. On the outside, I do a little bit more terraforming on the front of the building, and you can see from afar that the right side of the map is filled up pretty well by the Citadel. But there's still a ton of space in the middle and on the left side of the map that needs to be made. The right side of the map is tall and a lot to see over, and I don't want all of the views of the main cave entrance to be covered. So when I do the left side of the map, I instead dig into the ground, but we'll see that later. So with that completed, I have a gate, a citadel, and nothing connecting them. So I started working on a walkway going between the two, which would also connect to the other 2 sections of the city eventually. Going with the theme of conquering nature, I made all of the paths and courtyards in the city raised above the ground. Thinking about lore in a build isn't something I've done a lot of in the past, but I think it'll help to create unique, alive feeling maps if I make up a story for the places I'm building. So out here, it feels like the dwarves would have planned the city out and built it despite the land, instead of building with it. When I start to build inside the city, I want that feeling to change, so that the dwarves will build the inner city with the natural flow of the cave, to show that under the mountain is where they're most at home, and maybe they had lived in and came from under the mountain originally, and developed that city over time, and only expanded out of the mountain later with planning and purpose. So I was a bit distracted while building the central platform, and had been going for like 30 hours at this point, so mentally I was a bit cloudy and didn't think to measure the height of where I was building it, but it's a couple blocks higher than the front gate, so I had to slope the walkway up a bit, but it doesn't look too bad once I eventually give it a bit more gradual rise. I give the road a bit of a design that repeats, using the nether bricks and blackstone colors I've been using. After the front road is done, I go ahead and copy the design onto the path that leads to the Citadel, which is a bit farther above the ground, so it didn't quite fit right, so I did the design again by hand and copy and pasted it once that was done. Once that part's finished, I go back to the central area and start planning the shape. Instead of being a big open area, I raise the center and lower the corners, so there's a ton of depth and layering going on. The places on the lower platform near the upper platform also made for great areas to add some water fountains and pools. I go ahead and do some minor touches along the sides to get the detailing in, and eventually I come back and add a statue in the middle and decorate the pathways themselves. I'm a huge fan of this area, even though it's not really one of the more insane parts of the map, but I just really like the way that it connects together. Off to the side, I do another platform, which is smaller than the other platforms but has this really cool effect where I didn't put a door into the archway. So from afar, it looks like the corridor extends into this eerie blackness, and I think it has a cooler effect than a door. I did some more terraforming around the gate to get it into the mountainside, and then did some detailing and add another glyph-like pattern. Eventually, I'll connect the gateway to the inside of the mountain. But with the outside of this gate done, I go over to the left side of the outer city and start on the lower section of the project. So my goal over here was to create a chasm with stone walls on either side that dwarves had built archways and paths into, which eventually leads to a main gate at the end of the central walkway. Using sand and a brush to mask the sand with stone, I made the walls of the chasm, and then built walkways about halfway down the walls. Once I had done that, I copy-pasted the gate from the platform I had just built, but changed the design on the front just a bit. Then I started building the stairway down into the chasm, while also terraforming it into the rock. Making this all seem natural was a huge challenge, and I spent a ton of time doing this and then going back again and again to terraform more, but I think eventually it does seem like it's not a rectangle cut down into the ground. You can see me going back and adding more to the top and then going down into the chasm and chunking out more of the ground, but it never seemed like it actually felt deep because you could always see the stone at the bottom so easily. So I added water at the bottom, which gives that feeling of depth and makes it harder to notice how shallow the chasm actually is. Having more room to work with would have helped, but I was already at the bedrock layer of the map. After that, I finished up the sides of the pathways, adding blackstone in a line to make it easier to see that there's a structure there from afar. Then once the railings were finished, I started on the archways leading into the side. I'm not quite sure how functional these are going to be, especially the ones on the side of the chasm that lead under the lake. I might put a mine or some kind of vault under there, but for now they're just decorative from the outside. I think on the side that leads into the mountain that I'll actually keep going with those paths and take them all the way into the cavern inside. That way, all of those tunnels leading in will make for cool places to start building bridges and platforms on the inside. When I finished the first archway, I terraformed the area around it and extended the cliff out above the top and then cut into the wall so there was a crack running along it. I thought the edge was just a bit too flat and straight, and needed to have some natural movement in the side to get rid of that rigidness. I added the second archway and did a similar terraforming around that one as well. This is the first time I've actually done cliff terraforming by hand and not with WorldPainter, and I think it came out pretty well for the first time. On the other side of the chasm, I did a different style of archway, this one a double arch with panels in the middle, which I built before putting it into the wall just to make it easier on myself, and then I would go back later and terraform the cliff around it to make it look like the archway had been built into the cliff instead of the other way around. The last archway was a copy of the one across the chasm, since I thought I was going to connect them with a bridge, but decided that it obstructs the view of the main archway, and sometimes less is more. After getting the last arch where I wanted it, I finished up the terraforming, taking the cliffs out over the walkways, and then went around the corner and rounded out some of the rock on the flat wall too. I really enjoyed making cliff overhangs, and go back over on the right side to add another gate just as an excuse to do a little more cliff building later. But first, there's still a little bit of unused space to the left of the chasm, so I pasted another gate in and built a 3-tiered walkway going down the mountainside. The size and shape of the bottom 2 tiers are about the same, and I used World Edit to quickly make the orange squares, which I could replace with the stone pattern and then add decorations to the outside of, but just needed to quickly get the main body of them in place. I did basically the same thing with the stairs as well. The second tier I ended up putting a statue on, and the last tier at the bottom I built a small structure that can be a mint or a treasury building. Before building that, I go through and give the platform and the stairs details, with the platform having a diamond design that wraps around the corners. I also do single glyphs as decorations and use polished diorite to frame the building. At this point, I was definitely pretty tired, and looking back, this building isn't the most inspired or cool part of the project, but it's good enough that I'll leave it since it doesn't really ruin the city, but I'm pretty neutral on it as a whole. When I finished that, I went up and designed the second tier with more long triangle shapes, copy and pasting part of them around the platform to save time. I do actually like the platforms over here a lot, and think they fit into the city's theme really well. Then going up, I finished the first tier's platform with a similar design as the second tier, and then I add the Trixie Blocks Dwarven statue to the second. It's a really great design, and it fits the theme super well, so I used that but made a couple color adjustments to the axe. Towards the end, I used the statue a second time on the central platform in front of the Citadel, but give it a black stone helmet instead. With the platforms made, I connected them down into the chasm. This helps break up the section of the chasm above the main gate, which is a bit too boring for my taste, and also makes it so you can walk from the center, through the chasm, and all the way up the platform to get to that side of the city, and eventually all the way into the cavern inside. A little bit of terraforming around the base of the stairs and adding railings to the side make it fit with the rest of the chasm's walkways. Then I go along and add another brick stripes to the stairs on the platform and the stairs going to the chasm, finishing up this section of the map. So I've finally completed enough of the city to start working on the entrance to the cave. I didn't want to start this until I knew what the city was going to look like, because I wanted it to match the style. I looked up some concept art for Dwarven gates, had an idea in mind, and started to cut out the area I'd be working. I went with a mix of ideas, with the entrance to Erebor being one inspiration, but also with the pillars from the Mines of Moria as another, along with some other generic Dwarven concept art. So the columns to the side are inspired by Moria's pillars, which you can see in the shape at the bottom, where it starts out with a series of triangles going inwards, which turns into a square column, which ends in another series of triangles, and from there becomes a diagonal column. The top is similar to the bottom, but branches out and gets wider, and to make it a gate, I went with the style of the other gates I had made throughout the city already, and the two pillars meet in the center at a keystone. I added some supports beneath, since it looked pretty weighty, it made sense for there to be columns beneath it holding up the arch as well. I used red nether brick walls like I've been using in other gates and arches, and experimented with adding some black stone lines, but decided against it in the end. After that, I start on the lower portion of the entrance. The two sides connect with a wall segment, and are braced on either side by two pillars going up and out along with the rest of the wall. In the middle is another archway for passing through. I go ahead and add a second layer of supporting columns, which meet in the final pillar that goes upward from the wall to the keystone, since I still felt the archway looked too heavy and didn't have enough support. The end effect is a lot of open space to allow natural light into the cave, but still looks heavy and fortified as it should. I went through and added some decorations to the gate, but ended up going back a couple more times to add finishing details later on. And I also just made almost the entire area approaching the gate, which is a walkway gently sloping up to the main entrance, with two high patios on either side with water running through them, which have bridges to cross it, and leads to a series of archways going into the mountain that I then terraform a cliff hovering above. And I just added the second dwarf statue, and finished the designs of the walkways going through the central platform and leading up to the Citadel, then started connecting the platform to the cave entrance. There wasn't a ton of room to add decorations on the side, but I went with a design similar to others throughout the city. Moving back up to the area in front of the cave, I added blackstone and nether bricks along the paths for texture. I wasn't really going for a design, since a lot of the areas are strange shapes and would have been hard to fit one into. So instead, I traced along the walls of blackstone and had the main paths lined with nether bricks. With that, the entrance was basically finished, except for the lights which I would end up going through at the end and add. So with this done, there were only a couple more areas left that needed to be finished. There was still a large portion of unused grass near the outer city gate that I hadn't done anything with, so I went back and added large square water pools. The pools have paths made of nether bricks going around them, and crenellations along the outer walls, and then have 2 separate entrances onto the main walkway. That way, you could enter on one side, walk all the way around, and exit on the other side. After completing the first pool, I copied it and pasted it across the path. With the 2 pools that are squares, and the central platform with the Dwarven statue also being a large square behind them, the 3 squares are arranged in a symmetric triangle shape, which you can't really tell when you're down in the city, but I think looks really cool from above. I created a glyph pattern and then copy-pasted it to the bottom of both pools, and then to complete the area, I made a fountain centerpiece. I'm not sure if you can really tell in the end, but I wanted the fountains to look like miniature versions of all the towers that are around the city. So they have a triangle base that goes up and recedes into a diagonal column, and then expands out again to be a square with crenellations. To make the comparison between the fountain and the towers more obvious, I eventually go back and add blackstone and red wall segments for color. The final part of the map that I built was this tiny cave in the ground. I recycled one of the archways from the chasm, pasted it, and then terraformed around it to make the area seem natural. The overhang on this area is really intense and covers about half the archway, and I built the path down from the one that leads into the Citadel, then carved out more of the cave, terraformed a bit more, and completed a simple bridge leading across the gap to the entrance. I added a few tiny designs to the path, a couple wall segments to the bridge, and a little more terraforming, and this area was completed. So that's basically all of the big building done, but I did make a whole bridge across the lake and forgot to record it, so that's a noof. But with all of it finished, it was time to go through in the dark and light everything up. So for light, I made 2 designs. One of the designs is this street lantern. I made it to look like a Dwarven warhammer or war axe with the lanterns hanging down from the 2 ends of it. For a small design only using 10 different blocks, I really think it looks like what I was going for. The second design is this recessed lighting I just made. I did that by digging down 2 blocks, putting down a glowstone block, then covering it with light gray carpet, and then putting a stair facing down above that. I really hate the way exposed lights look in Minecraft. They really mess with shaders that have bloom on, and I think they're usually just distracting to see, especially on a build like this where there's a ton of space to light up. So being able to hide most of the lighting throughout the city was a huge plus to me. And that's all the building for this video. For the next couple minutes, I'm going to do some cinematic tours around the city, so stick around to see that. And for the next couple weeks, I'll be working on the second part of this video, where I make the city under the mountain. In the meantime, if you want updates, feel free to join the Discord. I post screenshots, updates, and ask for advice on my builds in there, and it's also just a really friendly community. So a link to that is in the description, as well as a link to my Instagram and Planet Minecraft page. Since I'm not done with this map, I haven't put it up for download yet, but all of my other maps are on Planet Minecraft for download, plus a couple extra ones I haven't made videos of. So if you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and subscribe and become a Geetle. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like, and if you hated it, I guess you can also give it a dislike, but just remember, whatever you choose, it still only counts as one. I'll see you next time.